Hi, I'm Michael, and this series presents a deep dive into a secret that I've been keeping for most of my life, but one that should never have been kept at all. It's my hope that learning my secret and the insights it has given me will help you understand either your own secrets or those of at least one person near to you. These audio episodes were originally recorded and released as a single 7.5 hour long video on YouTube. That video was really just me talking to the camera, so other than a few title cards, one thumbnail, and some body language for context, you're not really missing anything by listening rather than watching. Either way, you'll hear my message. That said, I only got asked to make an audio version after the original video was completed and released, so please understand that this introduction, my spoken trigger warnings, and the episode structure and breaks have all been hacked and hammered in after the fact, and please also excuse the few references to this video and the thumbnail. I don't think there will be anything too confusing in audio form, but if there is, a link to the original video is in the show notes. Also in the show notes will be links to any references and resources I mentioned in this episode. There are 8 episodes in total. Please only listen to them in order, as that order has been very carefully and very painfully chosen. This is episode 8 out of 8, Transmission Ends. It discusses what my experiences of traumatic violence and deep mental health crisis have created that I have to control, and also allowed me to have that control. And it finally reveals the real secret I've been holding for me behind the secret I've been holding for you.
Hi, I'm Michael, and what I constrain is a predator. What I inhibit is a recidivist. I'm not afraid that there might be some circumstances in which I could turn around to do to others what was done to me. I know that my body has been looking for an excuse, for permission, for any hint of justification to do to others much, much worse than was done to me, and it's been looking for that for decades. I know that at some point what was originally righteous and understandable and healthy anger that didn't get expressed because it wasn't accepted and embraced and heard and understood and responded to appropriately and right away, eventually soured and curdled into something unrighteous and incomprehensible and truly, viciously toxic within me. Sometime after my parents turned their child's wail for attention inwards and I started to hammer my need for care into my shame, what was meant to escape, what needed to escape, twisted into something that can never be allowed to escape. It became a desire, a yearning, an animal hunger that is constantly goading me to engage in unfathomable violence. When I was quite young and I saw some of my pretty alcoholic family interacting with that alcohol, I asked what the appeal was. Multiple adults I trusted as much as I've ever been able to trust anyone, adults I thought were supposed to be, despite mountains of evidence to the contrary, wiser and more informed and more mature than children, told me that they liked to drink because it lowered their inhibitions. To me, that was absolutely mind-numbingly baffling. How could anyone ever want to lower their inhibitions? Did these people really not know what it was they were inhibiting? My mother was inhibiting the desire to spin on a stool and giggle. My grandmother was inhibiting a mean, vicious tongue and a set of dentures that once left her mouth like something out of the movie Alien. This one was inhibiting an affair. That one, whatever voice said white men can dance and do have rhythm.
The following passage contains descriptions of extremely violent emotions, impulses, and imagery.
I inhibit something that would, if my body felt it had to survive, participate in genocide. Something that would dash the brains of infants out against a tree, that would rape and torture and slaughter, and with nothing more than a hammer or a lump of wood or just its fists would gleefully fill a pit with naked corpses caked in lime. Something that would and could convince others to join it in doing the same. I inhibit something that if I listen carefully, really listen, I know, would fight to feel that it had to do that to survive, would battle to convince and confuse and overwhelm my mind just so it could get to participate. And I know this because it does fight every day in little ways. It's fighting to convince me, to delude me right now, to participate just because it wants to participate. And I don't mean this in an abstract sense. I have stood in the killing fields of Cambodia and found myself looking in the dust and the dirt beneath a cursed tree at the cracked, indescribably tiny mandible and loose baby teeth of an infant victim of genocide, and at a mass grave for children I've heard what I inhibit begging to be let loose. Even there, in that place, it's jealous it didn't get to participate, that I don't get to participate. Not because any part of me agrees with the idea of genocide or any of the ideas that have driven it, are driving it, and will drive it again soon, but just because it wants to participate. It yearns to participate. It has hungered to participate in violence, any and every imaginable kind of violence, for as long as I can remember. And again, not an abstraction. When I put my body in front of what a shotgun at point-blank range does to a human chest, I protected my ex-wife from witnessing horror, but also from witnessing me salivating at the smell of charred human meat. The hunger for violence inside my walls dwarfs the hunger for food inside my belly. I've known what I inhibit since the first time I noticed that I scan for weapons whenever I enter any room, even a room I've been in before, even a room I know I'm alone in. I know because I've heard how much the thing I inhibit yearns to use those weapons, to use all the weapons, to be the weapon. I've also known, since I was 5, that children's bodies can be sexualized. Since I was 15, that teenage bodies can find pleasure in sadistic sexual violence. And since the day I turned 16, that I'm a psychopath with no moral compass, no empathy, and a possibly unreachable limit for pain. If I don't constrain and inhibit what I have always constrained and inhibited, if I don't do my job, people will die, or worse. Children will die, or worse. Societies will die, or worse. Inside of me is something that understands why you slam airplanes full of people into buildings full of other people. It wants to tear down nations, to be the apocalypse. What little of what you'd call me remains. The thing that chose the name Michael exists to make sure it doesn't ever get to be. What I am talking about here isn't my psychopath. No, that's what I hide behind the mask. This isn't something I hide. This has always been visible. If you had any clue what you were looking for and listened with actually open ears, I constrain it, meaning I set its limits. I inhibit it, meaning I keep it from running past those limits. But I don't and I can't contain it. You can't contain it. You can only harness and throttle it, or you can be destroyed by it, or you can watch it and you destroy someone else. Think of the mask as the armor, the psychopath as the structure that armor sits on. This is the engine, what drives you forward, what pushes you to whatever extremes you will ever reach. It is power. Well, when you want to launch a deep space probe, that engine is going to have an explosive amount of power. I have never, not once, been trying to keep myself safe from the rest of you. I've been trying to keep the rest of you safe from the thing that pushes me and myself to all the extremes. My real self, my butcher, my carnivore, my cannibal, my beast. The thing that grew up inside the shell of what remained of me because it loathes the mask that murdered Mike to keep Michael alive. The thing that started hating everything that remained of me because one automatic part of me had compromised and survived by doing something another automatic part of me believes is shameful and shameworthy. By doing something it believes it's better to die than compromise on. The thing that started hating anyone and anything else it learned was just as or more compromised. The thing that wants to fight and never fawn. The thing that knew, automatically knew, that if it looked anything like me, then it was just as compromised as me. That if it had the shape of first a boy, then a man, then it was capable of doing what a man had done. And then the moment it got wounded by the other half of humanity, the thing that started hating those things too. The thing that despises anything that stands on 2 feet, has 2 hands, looks out from behind animal eyes, and contains the arrogance to pretend it's thinking when what it's really doing is addressing its needs and its desires. How I kept you safe, kept your children safe. How I keep you safe and keep your children safe. How I endure being around a species I desperately want to love and trust, but no, I absolutely can't because I am a member of that species, is I choose to never let my beast feed. I did that by walling it off, caging it behind and within the layers upon layers upon layers of what became my shame. Shame I am still using. Shame that because I was never trained or prepared to do this, but just figured it out by happenstance and bloody violence and a lot of sheer blind luck, I was forced to use in a dirty, undirected, amateur, and once more self-harming manner. I had to build the extremely negative beliefs CPTSD drags with it, to commit to them. I was touched by something infected and corrupt, and over my thoughts and impulses gave me more than just a hint that I was infected and corrupt too. Well, when I simply wasn't allowed to vomit out that corruption and purge myself of it, I had to engage my very human propensity for cognitive bias. I'd stop myself from infecting anyone else by taking every single impulse and thought as proof of my infection. I made myself sick with shame to keep myself from doing something sick with my shame, a toxic means of stopping a toxic fire from consuming us all. That is how and why each and every time violence visits my life again, and my beast stirs and wakes and tries to get loose, and I feel the mass of its cage rattling and creaking, I have to spend even more of what dwindling time I have left building that cage back up, better and stronger and heavier than it was when I left it, before shoving my beast back where it needs to remain, with that inside of that, and with that which remains inside my shame. Maybe that gives you the tiniest hint of why just let it go is such incredibly bad and stupid advice. My persistent negative views of myself, which eventually became persistent and negative views of my species, and all the rage and anger bound up within them, they might all be my confirmation bias. They might be utterly false. But I've been listening for a long time, very intently. I've got lots of evidence to back them up. If it's you or your children or your grandchildren within my reach, just how committed are you to your thought-terminating cliches? I don't trust me, and I have a lifetime of proof that I can hold back what the thoughtless and stupid thoughtlessly and stupidly call evil. Would you really rather I trust you and what you only think you know of me? As a child, I swallowed poison. Somehow I survived it because, again, somehow, shame absorbed it. It walled it off. But it wasn't an antidote. It wasn't a cure. It's just a place that poison sits. I can't dismantle my shame, and I can't express my anger, just in case the poison I swallowed is still there. Sadly, I've no idea why pushing thwarted anger into toxic shame is such a common, often crippling expression of unaddressed trauma. Why, precisely, the alternative pathways that are PTSD, and especially CPTSD, seem so biased towards manifesting it so intensely. I wish I did understand that. But the why is really something for future psychologists, or more likely neurologists, to figure out. I didn't get to choose the mechanism. I wish I could say that I did. That selecting shame was an act of intention and volition, because if it had been a considered decision, I should, or at least could, feel pride for the results. But all I did was find the shame already there, ready and waiting. My guess is the seed of shame at the core of me started really early. In fact, it's almost certainly born into all of us. Shame is probably something all the social primates feel, a kind of negative feedback mechanism to inhibit actions an individual might benefit from, but that would harm the family, or the troop, or the tribe, or the species. Maybe shame is the first political emotion, though I'd guess it's more political thoughts and political meaning shared using the much cruder, simpler emotions we inherited from that titmouse. My first sensation and awareness of what shame is for and how it operates was probably before I was even out of diapers. Maybe when my well-meaning parents responded with more disgust and frustration than laughter and tickles because of what I'd filled those diapers with, or perhaps when one of them spanked me a little too hard because they'd scared themselves by letting me crawl too close to the road. Maybe it starts as a convenient way to teach us, to teach our children to stop shitting their pants or crawling into traffic. Maybe there's some evolutionary advantage to being prone to feeling an appropriate amount of shame as a way of quickly learning what lines to not cross. It doesn't really matter where or when it starts. The point is that tiny grain of irritating sand encased in an initial skin of shame was already there, ready to be added on top of. That day I went to school and received an education. I don't believe that it was the particular act that caused that shame to grow as explosively or exponentially as it did. When a fully grown adult human male undid his comically large belt buckle and pulled out something that I'd never seen and had no words for, then proceeded to get me to do with it something I also had no words for and could not know to do, I must have said or done something that displeased him or scared him, irritated him. I don't know. I can only guess he was in a very agitated state, heart thumping, brain, if he had one, overwhelmed by heat and pressure, probably shame. But it was his shame, not mine. And because I lacked the words, I think I probably lacked shame at what the words represented too. Maybe I showed disgust. There were smells I still don't like, or maybe I giggled or laughed. Nervousness and fear can do that, and who doesn't know that thing in his hand wasn't both ludicrously funny looking, but also kind of grotesquely horrifying. In hindsight, I wish my beast had been there then, telling me to bite, telling me to fight, baying at me to kill, even if it meant being killed. But that me hadn't been born yet. That me was still on its way. Instead, one way or another, something I did or didn't do, I'll never know, but I default to assuming it was something I did, caused his fingers to close round my neck, to squeeze. I'll also never know what happened to make those fingers open up again. Not precisely. It'll never play out in my mind like a picture show, but I know my mask did something, said something, acquiesced somehow, participated, compromised, because I know I woke again. I died, I know, or more accurately, I know I was dying. The world went dark around the edges, and the colors drained away from the grout around the one cracked tile I'll never forget, the tile that will never, ever leave me till the world goes dark around the edges and the colors drain away again for the last time. But before what I knew as Mike died, my inner psychopath's mask rose up, breaching like a leviathan out of my cold and darkness, and it did whatever it did to compromise Mike's soul in order to keep Michael's body alive. Even there, though, I tend to think the shame hadn't grown. Not yet. Not while that horrible moment was a secret between him and me. No, my body's somatic memories and my mind's episodic ones, they agree on that one point. The shame started to grow in the classroom after the fact, in the moment when the teacher and all the children laughed, where I'd become the punchline of a joke I hadn't heard and couldn't know. If you want to wound a child, laugh at them when they've hurt themselves. If you want to kill that child, laugh at them when they've just been raped. If you want to turn that child into a predator, laugh at them after they've just been raped, and then get a lot of other children to laugh at them with you. Give them a social death right after they've survived their first physical one. After a predator has isolated them from the herd and mauled them, ostracize them, alienate them, don't allow them to rejoin the safety of the herd. It wasn't their fault, of course, not the teacher and not the students. They'd done nothing wrong. But what they had done was giving me my first taste of something horrifying that wouldn't come full circle until my 16th birthday. They'd shown me, reflected in their grotesquely twisted smiles, a glimpse of what had risen in me, what had yielded and compromised and survived by killing me. They'd shown me just a flash of my budding psychopath. I wouldn't know the word for many years, much less be able to consider it in depth, but their utter lack of empathy for me made it, for the briefest of moments, shockingly and distressingly clear that I also didn't and couldn't have even the slightest hint of empathy for them. In fact, I loathed them, I hated them, I wanted to hurt them, just for the crime of laughing. What eventually became my beast was born there. From that moment, myself and my species were traveling on different vectors, and they'd never do anything but grow further and further apart. I was still in shock, and I was standing in an extremely dangerous place. That classroom was just yards away from the most dangerous and bewildering event I had just discovered was even within the scope of imagining. And I already knew that tomorrow I'd be made to return, forced to return, that for at least the next 12 years I was going to be returning to either this place or another just like it. To this day, I can't enter a school of any sort without feeling terror. Worse, my body was going to force me to return and return and return, even if my society didn't. I can avoid schools as an adult, but I was never going to be able to avoid urinals and toilets forever. Trying to empathize, struggling to empathize at 45 years distance with what that child's body must have been feeling, with discovering in real time what the human acute stress response actually feels like to something so young, so naive. To have instantly learned just how deeply your mind can suddenly need to avoid triggers your body will force you to revisit every day for the rest of your foreseeable life. Thinking on that intense disconnect between that mind and body, it disassociates me now deeply. And I've had the perverse advantage of all this time and all this distance inside that body to help guide me back along the way. If you dare to think you can empathize with that, if you think whatever you feel right now comes even close to empathy with that, you are blinded by a pride that child and this adult will never, ever get to know. How that body navigated my way through learning the idiot words of the Pledge of Allegiance by rote, words I still can't forget because of how fundamentally bitter they are in my adult mouth, I'll never know. How it navigated the rest of the day, and especially getting back on the bus, possibly with the same driver, while as disassociated and tunnel visioned as I now know I'd be today, how it made it home with the remnants of me alive at all is mystery. When I did get home, when I got to where my mom had made a cake to celebrate my first day of school, and I saw that cake and the uncrossable gulf between what it was meant to celebrate in the imagined timeline that didn't happen and what it actually celebrated in the real one that just had, that's when the floodgates released. And the wail I let out was so sharp, so strong, so monstrously loud. A tidal wave that overwhelmed both my parents before they had a hope of responding appropriately. So they replied with their own acute stress responses as I've described and started to twist the anger and grief and pain and horror and terror implicit in that wail inward towards my seat of shame. By first not hearing and then silencing and then disciplining my attempts to express my sudden and shocking anger, which any trained and prepared adult could have and should have known was the heightened arousal and reactivity of post-traumatic stress. They taught me that my wail of rage was something unacceptable, something that would only ever be met with negative feedback, with punishment. Well, a child can only respond to punishment in one of two ways, either with shame if they think the punishment might be just, or anger if it isn't. Can anyone who isn't a programmer see the recursion bug they just let loose on me? My righteous anger at a bus driver was met with unjust shame. My just anger at unjust shame was met with more shame and would never be met with anything else. Righteous, just, justified, it didn't matter. My parents had accidentally engineered a loop that could only teach me that escalating shame was the only appropriate, adult-approved, socially acceptable response to escalating anger. By the time my father first rejected my body and my mother started to cut off its food, the feedback loop was complete. It was sealed. From that moment onwards, any attempt to voice my rage at the unfairness of it all outwards would instantaneously turn that rage amplified inwards, a perpetual, growing, agonizing dissonance that would never, could never be allowed to find anywhere to escape. All I could do was shove it inwards using the two different forms of violence and discipline they demonstrated to build a rough cage. And the harder it beat against the walls I'd caged it within, the harder those walls became. While any time it threatened to be exposed, I'd add more shame and hammer in from the outside as well, struggling in vain to keep it contained. I wrapped it in more shame, then more shame, then more shame again. Then eventually I wrapped it in food, and then fat, and then those added to the density of it all, and that density started to warp reality itself to the point I can't ever know exactly what myself looks like. At the same time, I know far, far too well what myself is capable of. One of the hard absurdities of physics is that you only ever get to see and measure and understand a black hole by the light that isn't there, by what it isn't telling you. The place, a darkness so incredibly heavy and dense that it distorts the face of reality itself, sits inside a corona of burning, screaming, wailing, superheated mass. Galaxies will spin around that place. First light and then space and time itself will bend and twist to avoid passing through it. On my first day of school, I saw my darkness by the light of my rage for the first time, and I recoiled so hard I hid it from myself, behind my psychopath, inside my shame. On my 16th birthday, I saw it again, and I recoiled so hard that I hid it from my species, compressing that shame into something so dense and hot it started to feed off the rage, pulling so hard I could never fully escape its gravity, while pushing so hard I couldn't do anything but fling out to the extremes and pick up speed. And on that fatal orbit, every time I've met it again, I've decided to keep it secret once more, to try and keep it locked away, even as I knew I'd end up returning and returning and returning. And then I got kicked in the head in Peterborough just as I'd shed all that insulating mass one more time. Every time I've come close to the thing that isn't within, I've retreated. And with each swing I've come close again, then retreated again. Over and over and over. Each time I gather speed, each time I lose distance, stuck on just another kind of phugoid's curves, in and out, up and down, apogee and perigee. The weight has always only ever been a means of insulating the rest of you from my secret, of keeping my rage constrained, of keeping my psychopath and my walled-off shame and the endless void it exists to keep me from seeing myself, from being seen by anyone but myself. It's been the most violently controllable measure of an uncontrolled and violent life, and now I've lost it. And before I run out of my reserves completely and risk gaining it back again, I've got to finally expose what always should have been known. I've got to take this moment when I'm not in control of anything whatsoever except my weight, to take control of the real phugoid I've been within the whole time. Hi, I'm Michael, and I'm a monster. And I know it. I know my monster. I know the gargantuan, terribly naked, terribly vulnerable, terribly monstrous thing coiled unseen and usually unseeable at the dead center of me. I know what it's capable of, what it hungers for, what it will consume. I know it's dangerous, incredibly dangerous, unbelievably dangerous. And again, I use those words precisely. Part of you does not find that danger credible. It sees me appearing vulnerable, and it wants to disbelieve me. But again, this isn't my testimony, it's just the facts. And the fact is, you will never find yourself wanting to see my monster or how dangerous it really is. I'm not exaggerating, I'm not attention-seeking, and I'm not lying. This isn't me being figurative, and I'm not using a metaphor. I am not just aware of something monstrous, I am something monstrous. I have met my monster many times. I have observed it, learned it, known it, and I want you to know my monster now, precisely because I know my monster, which means I know yours. And make no mistake, you're a monster too. You might not know yet that you're that which remains. You might not get to meet your psychopath or its mask. It may not be familiar yet. If you're lucky, it may never be familiar, but it's there, waiting for you, should you ever need it. And beneath it, your beast, that which survives, that which will survive, that which is the will to survive, but also that which kills and wills to as well. the thing that wants power and that for some reason finds power over others much easier and more attractive than power over self. And again, it may not be familiar yet. If you're lucky, you'll never know the rage that annihilates, that revels in killing, that wants to rampage and rape, the maker that yearns to destroy, not anything in particular, but everything all at once. But again, it's there, waiting for you, should you ever get forced where you don't want to go. And maybe, if that rage gets hot enough, if you stare at it long enough, you'll see the vacuum too. The unquenchable void, the hunger that never ends, the aching, insatiable emptiness that cannot ever be filled, your yawning dark, the hole in the universe that underlies us all, the drain every living thing, everything that lives, fights to fill so that it might avoid falling in, right up until the moment it can't, and it doesn't. Seeing your monster is hard. Nothing in you wants to look at it. Nothing in you wants to see. It sits in the place where your eyes are looking out, where your thoughts develop and percolate before they're given a voice. Get a glimpse of it, and your mind and your body will want to recoil, and they will not want to look again. And for all the many ways the rest of you will fight to never really see your monster, that is nothing compared to how hard it will fight to never admit your monster exists, to never let anyone else know. The secret you don't want to know is at the core of you. Actually meet your monster face to face. That's when you really get to discover if you're going to die culpable, liable, responsible, or some combination of the three. When you find out if you are predator, prey, or both. The horrifying thing, the truly horrifying thing, is that it's also when you discover that you don't get a choice in the matter. No choice at all. You don't get to predict the outcome. You don't get to see the dice until you find out how they rolled. You don't get to know you're trustworthy until you find out if you never were. All you can do is hope and pray to something you can only hope and pray is listening and cares, and almost certainly isn't, and almost certainly doesn't. Knowing your monster is even harder. You can only do that if you keep meeting it over and over by learning to speak to something primitive, alien, hot, seething, and then talking to it over and over, slowly, methodically, carefully probing over and over and over at something that just might want to kill you as much or more than it wants to kill everyone and possibly everything else. Maybe, perversely, the only reason I can see and know my monster is because I was forcibly exposed to someone else's so perversely early. Maybe that impact left me twisted so far around that by the time I was exposed to another, it left me looking where nothing wants to look and seeing what nothing wants to see. Well, if that's true, it's been 45 years since I got twisted around and 34 years since I recognized what I saw there. But even right now, as I've been reading this, everything that is wrapped around that monster and is desperately clinging to survival as a member of this species has just as desperately been fighting to keep me from admitting and saying out loud what it doesn't want you to know is at the core of me. Even now, even though I've kept my monster caged long enough that I trust the bars and I have made myself a zoo for you to learn from, my mask still is terrified of being out of a job. My monster is all the things I've learned late in my life to love about myself, and all the things I learned early in that life to hate and despise. It's the racism and sexism my culture pushed into me from before I was even born, and the fact I've grown enough to start letting that go. It's the gender I get assumed to have because of how a body I only inhabit just happened to be shaped, and the fact that shape and gender at least did me the favor of helping me get paid enough to be able to afford to spend so much of my time thinking. It's the sexual identity I never got asked about, never consented to, and so will never and can never determine unmolested for myself. And the way that weird superposition that it left me in makes it so much easier for me to accept others than it often does for them to accept themselves. It's the negatives and the positives and the false negatives and the false positives. It's all the things I do and do not like, whether I don't like them because I genuinely don't like them or because I genuinely do like them but don't want anyone else to know that I do. My monster isn't what's been hidden behind my mask, or the mask itself. It isn't my shame or the beast it holds back, or any of my experiences or any of my secrets. It certainly isn't, and never was, my weight. All of that is just what circles my dark, but my monster isn't the dark either. No. My monster is my night and my light. It's the void and everything trying in vain to fill it. And in the end, when I've run out of time and light and it hasn't been filled, even after I'm gone, my monster will be the void that remains. My monster isn't bad or good, it's not right or wrong, it's just present in its absence, and it's present and absent in all of us. It takes clarity to see that, and clarity comes when you bring a little light into the dark, and as I've just described and revealed, in all that I've described and revealed, I'm that space probe, and I've spent a lot of time looking on your behalf at the dark. Find that clarity, and it breaks you. That's when you look up at the sky and see that it isn't blue at all, that it never was blue, that it never could have been blue. If the sky was blue in the night as you dream it is when your nearest star happens to be shining on it in the day, then you could never have seen the other stars at all. An entire species, if asked, sees a transparent sky that was never blue as blue because of what is literally just a trick of the light. Clarity means seeing what's actually there as well as what isn't actually there. Not just what appears to be there but may not be. Almost every member of that species that only thinks they know me, if asked, sees a nice man with a good heart and decent motives. Clarity is knowing that what any of us shows any other is just a trick of the light. I want you to know my monster, actually know, with clarity. A nice man doesn't show you the monstrosity within. That's one of the thought-terminating cliches underlying the weird social contract we all call humanity. Monsters don't announce themselves. You don't know them just because they've knocked at the door. They reveal themselves by doing something wrong. I've broken that unwritten rule by doing something not wrong, but uncanny. I've opened up my chest and showed you my heart and pointed out that it isn't good, it isn't bad. It's just a beating, pulsating, twitching lump of meat that's slowly, second by second and thump by thump, pushing my body towards the moment it runs out of both seconds and thumps. My motives are those of an admitted psychopath. I've done all this because I don't have a moral compass, can't empathize with you, and have always been deceiving your senses and your emotions and your thoughts just as a function of surviving just so long as that heart keeps beating. I am trying to give you a taste of true clarity by breaking all the tricks of the light. And I've had to take the long way to doing that because I know incredibly intimately all the many, many monstrous ways our bodies can and will deceive and confound and confuse our minds. I live in a body that can barely see. The rods and the cones in the back of my eye respond, to the degree they respond, to 3 tiny wavelength peaks in a nearly infinite spectrum of light. Everything I can ever see will come from those sparse, tiny, minuscule peaks, and if they arrive outside an extremely narrow amplitude band, if those waves are even a tiny bit too weak or too strong compared to what those eyes are used to from that not blue sky, I'll either be blind in the dark and freezing in the cold, or I'll have been blinded by the light and burning in the heat. In either case, I cannot see. I live in a body that can barely feel. If that light falls on another body that doesn't look or behave pretty much identical to my own, I won't know to love it or hate it, and I certainly won't empathize with it. If I don't already know what I'm looking at, I'll feel fear. If I do, then I can pass from my worst kind of love to my worst kind of hate just because its smile reminds me of a sneer. Just like our physical senses, our emotions exist to make extremely sparse information passing through an extremely narrow window feel like an entire world when it isn't. And again, feel too little or feel too much, and you will feel pain briefly before not feeling anything more at all. The most primitive parts of our brains amplify and explode and distort these weak, crude signals along the way, striving so hard to pick out what is meaningful to the beast and the mask that they'll deceive our bodies into feeling emotions we shouldn't have because our mind has imagined bodies and faces that were never there. That combination, the physical senses and the nerves that propagate their signals, and the emotional senses and the glands and bloodstream that propagate those, and most of the central nervous system, and all of the sympathetic nervous system and the endocrine system, all of this machinery exists in all of us. We have it all in common. It's our feeler. We share something similar with pretty much every mammal, and something a little more or less removed with every other animal. If it's got a body, if it's got senses 2 cents width, then it feels. The only questions are how much and for how long. There's nothing monstrous about that which feels. Feeling is, in a very real sense, the only thing all life has in common. Well, if you think about it, the very first thing that felt anything at all felt pain. Because whatever it felt was 100% of what it could compare against. It was all the signal and all the noise it was capable of enduring or bearing all at once. The very first thing that felt anything at all suffered. And so do we the first time we feel anything at all. All life, literally all that lives, has ever lived, will ever live, while it lives, is suffering. Again, the only questions are how much and for how long. The feeler feels, but it cannot think, it cannot reason, it cannot plan, it cannot know. All it can do is try to feed the void, to fill the hole that cannot be filled, to placate its need. And that need is unspeakable. Actually unspeakable. The feeler has no words, no language. It can only take meaning from what it feels and give meaning by what it makes other feelers feel. It can laugh and grunt and scream, but it cannot speak. There's nothing monstrous about the feeler that feels. The monstrous begins when the feeler tries to become a thinker that thinks. The thinker, to the degree any of us should be sure we even have one, thinks but cannot feel, and unless we work to develop it and distance it from the feeler, that thinker will think monstrous things, and if it's not mastered, it will act on them too. At first, because it doesn't think they're monstrous, and then because monstrous things don't feel monstrous just because you've just done them and think they should. You and me, we've got all these animal programs prodding us down ancient paths, trying to take our minds where our bodies want to go. Familiar places, comfortable places, dark places, savage places. Places, if you actually think about it, you know you wouldn't think to go. That becoming thinker, that is monstrous, because it only thinks it thinks. It thinks it reasons. It thinks it plans. It thinks it knows, but it does not know. When it thinks enough of what it does not know, the thinker speaks. The thinker pokes and prods the feeler, forcing it to laugh and grunt and scream in little tiny, repetitive, structured ways. And so the thinker uses the feeler's savage tools to provoke other feelers to tell would-be thinkers what they only think they think. Everything we think to call society is built atop that foundation of ignorance and confusion. Billions of us feeling our feelings, some smaller number thinking our thoughts, and none of us yet able to speak with anything but that flapping slab of meat we call a tongue. All of us sharing nothing except what we only think others think and feel others feel. Using words we only think are shared, we speak so much we never actually hear and recognize what we do not and cannot actually know. To actually think, to actually know, to not just pretend at thinking and feeling, and so pretend at both empathy and knowledge, the thinker has to set aside its childish thoughts. It has to lever itself up out of the mud and the muck and stop feeling what it feels Stop thinking about what it feels. Stop thinking and feeling that its thinking about feeling matters at all. It needs to create a meta-thinker, that which thinks about thinking, that which stares deeply at every single thought and feeling it has ever had and knows it is wrong. Not wrong as in bad, but wrong as in insufficient, incorrect, false, suspect, untested, and unrefined. Not necessarily a mistruth, but a missed truth, a fuzzy, poorly understood, primitive picture of reality snapped through a badly focused lens by a distracted tourist with no earthly idea how their camera works. It needs critical tools for critical work, and to forge those from the savage ones either nature or nature's gods have saddled it with, that would-be thinker needs to abandon all its thought-terminating cliches, which includes abandoning both the concepts of natures and gods to start with. It needs to develop from zero, from a blank page, a complete formal epistemology. A word I'm not even going to try to define here, except to say that if you can't teach someone else in detail and starting from utter ignorance what that word means, actually means, then you haven't yet taught it to yourself well enough to know you have one, which means you don't. Anything that wants to do more than pretend at thinking needs to recognize that words it only built up out of sounds its primitive voice box could make and its primitive ears could hear might not be sufficient to understand, much less describe, much less define, the universe. The would-be meta-thinker starts to build eyes it does not have, to see what it cannot see. It starts to build ears it does not have, to hear voices singing in octaves made of ancient, invisible light. Once it's done that, it sets aside both gods and religions until it has a chance to meet the former face to face and debate the contradictions and merits of the latter with them. Maybe, if it thinks about thinking long enough and hard enough, it starts to design and engineer and assemble the kind of language it would need to have that debate. Words for saying what can't be said, for communicating what can't be communicated, for speaking the unspeakable, but transmitting meaning anyway. Setting aside the merely monstrous, that takes time we haven't had yet, and effort we haven't made yet. The very best amongst us, which I in no way claim to be, is still a very deeply, insidiously monstrous being. We really haven't been looking for all that long, but for all we know, we might very well be the first and only things that have ever had enough arrogance to even just pretend at thinking. We haven't been listening all that long either, but for all we know, we might also be the first and only things that have ever pretended at speaking and writing at symbolic language. We might also well be the last of both. Less than 100 years ago, a species that less than 100 centuries ago was still beating two cold rocks together to make a knife, figured out just enough physics to beat two hot rocks together to make a nuclear bomb. If we don't learn how to do more than merely think we think, if we don't figure out how to speak in words that carry their definitions within them and can't be misinterpreted, then it's only a matter of time before we learn what happens when a monstrous species that doesn't know itself puts a thermonuclear gun in the hands of a monstrous man who only thinks he knows himself and who then decides to shoot himself in the foot he's put in the mouth of the head he shoved up his ass. If it thinks at all, it doesn't put a weapon in anyone else's hands. It makes the weapon safe, then it puts the weapon down. Long, long ago, a possum far, far wiser than most said something very, very true. We have met the enemy, and he is us. Cognitive bias, parasocial relationships, thought-terminating cliches, religious dogma, propaganda. Your feeler barely feels, but it feels that what it feels is its own feelings. Your thinker barely thinks, but it thinks that what it thinks is its own thinking, and they both work to reinforce each other. But in the light of those concepts I just mentioned, you should already know that they're both fundamentally wrong. If you hadn't been cheated out of what should actually represent a minimal Education, you would recognize at a glance just how wrong they are. But because you'll sit in front of a mirror and feel and think that you see something unique and worthy and deserving of happiness looking back at you because you desperately want to believe it is there, the odds are that at some point today, you'll buy something that fulfills no actual purpose whatsoever except to validate that thought from someone who knows you better than you only think you do, and you'll transfer a small bit of the time of your life onto someone else's balance sheet. If you think your worst enemy is someone else, you haven't been looking in that mirror with sharp enough eyes. Look harder. Look sharper. Don't get distracted by whether the glass is half full or half empty. Know what's in the fucking glass. And then, and only then, choose if you consume it. I know exactly what this glass contains. I know myself. Uncomfortable as it is, I have worked to become comfortable with that discomfort. I know both who and what I am. If I look into the face of my nemesis, that face is mine, has always been mine, and only ever will be mine. I'm the kid that choked down incandescent rage, but I'm also the man that did the choking. I'm the one that got kicked in the head, but I'm also the one that did the kicking. I know that I'm a monster. That's freeing because it means I'm nothing special. I'm not unique. I'm not even unusual. I'm not a Superman or a supervillain. I wasn't empowered by some freak mutation or freakish accident. I'm just a monster, just like you. And along with you, I'm just one of the infinite failure states possible within a human being, just one infinitesimal point on the line between rising ape and falling angel. And if we're being at all honest, that is a very long line, and not one of us has ever made it very far from that ape. And I'm not one of the madmen or charlatans claiming to be one of the angels. I'm not your guide. I'm not your God. I'm certainly not your Messiah. I may be named for an archangel, but I'm about the furthest thing from one. I'm just as close to that ape as you, maybe even closer. Far away as my perspective might be from yours, my fingertips are reaching for the same rung up the same ladder. I just know it's the bottom rung, that humanity and everything that succeeds it is above us, that we're at the beginning looking forward, at the bottom looking up. But I also know that there's nothing there above us, just the void waiting to be filled. There's no intelligent life out there, if there isn't yet down here. There's no good, there's no bad, there certainly is no evil. Those are old, simplistic myths, trivial, thought-terminating cliches that never worked and that we should have long ago discarded. But we still want to carry the relics of their corpses around with us because we feel that they keep us a little insulated from the cold when they don't. They died hard, but just like us, they die, and those ones died long before either you or I were born, even if you're desperately trying to cling to them today. There are no mythical heroes. There are no heroes at all, nor are there any villains. There are no great men, and there never were. No protagonists or antagonists. No leaders who aren't following someone. No prophets with a direct line to the Almighty, or a backdoor key into heaven. There is no heaven, no hell, no afterlife that isn't just what keeps happening when you're no longer here. There are no stories or even myths. They're just imaginary ghosts of uncompleted dreams that we imagine we carry inside of our heads. There are no titans. There are no frost giants. There is not, and never has been, a celestial cow. The thing below you wasn't rolled up by a planet-sized dung beetle and isn't the disc on the back of 4 elephants held up by a sky turtle. While whatever you think you believe in might feel less ridiculous than those examples, there is someone downstream from you who knows it is. There are no pantheons. There are no gods. There are no plans. If it planned to crush a 3-year-old girl before these eyes, it is too monstrous to exist. There is no final judge and no final judgment, no weighing of souls, no balancing of the scales. There is no justice. There is just us until there isn't. While we're here, you and I, right now, we're it. We're the current limit. There are no higher powers. There never have been any higher powers, and there likely, very likely, will not be any higher powers except for the ones we either make ourselves or make of ourselves. To do that, To fulfill that promise, to reach for those stars that will never reach for us, we have to understand and know and embody just how far we are from the mark, and to reject the notion of allowing ourselves to be anything less. I am dangerous beyond words precisely because I learned how we can do all this violence to ourselves, so much more violence than could ever be done by any one of us to any of the others. I am capable of exceptional, even superhuman, violence, but I will not allow myself pride until I don't act on that, until I don't just think, but I actually know that my thinker has mastered my feeler. While I live, I'm the most dangerous member of the most dangerous species to ever live, and I've made myself safe by continuing the work of killing myself, by never allowing myself the comfort and refuge of feeling, much less thinking, much less knowing that I'm the protagonist in my story, when I am definitionally the character who cannot know how that story ends. I have hurt to set aside my very human desire to inflict hurt on others. I have ached and forged myself with much pain and effort into a sword, a very, very sharp sword, and I have sheathed that sword inside myself precisely because I know that I'm not a good sword, I'm not a bad sword, I'm not a hero's sword, and I'm not a villain's. I am merely a weapon that exists, but should never, ever be used. That is why, when it ends, when the pain stops and my battle is finally finished, my exhausted corpse will be facing my exhausted enemy. We will be facing each other. We will be looking within, my monster and me, taming each other, keeping us safe for you. That's what I want for you. That's what I hope I've transmitted to you. A little bit of a glimpse into the places I've seen that you may have not seen. By the light of my bridges burning, I hope you can get some clarity in your darkness. I hope you've got a hint of your monster within. If you have, try not to waste it. Try to look where your eyes don't want to go. Know your monster. Tame your monster. Control your monster. Don't ever let it do unto others what your monster would have done unto you until you are absolutely certain your monster isn't a masochist. Recognize the bugs in your thought-terminating cliches. If you can do better than me, embrace your monster. Love your monster. If you can do even better than that, love the other monsters too. Greater love hath no being than this, that it lays down its life for all its nemesis, for its worst enemies, never just its friends. Seriously, recognize the bugs in your thought-terminating cliches. And if you can't do that yet, then at least stop shaming your children. Stop fucking your children. Not just in the most literal, horrible sense. Stop fucking them up. Stop fucking them over. Stop fucking their futures. Stop voting for anyone who is so fucking stupid that they think the future should look like the past. Stop turning little monsters into big ones you can only hope will tame themselves. Stop turning the ones who don't tame themselves into machines for making more of the same. Stop silencing kids when they're distressed. Start figuring out why they're distressed. Don't allow a world in which 20 years or 30 years or 40 years from today, 1 in 6 of today's boys or 1 in 4 of today's girls is just about to start trying to get meaningful help for the first time. Stop allowing a healthcare system to be so fundamentally broken and underfunded that it cannot provide that help where and when it is required. Start putting money and time and effort into meaningfully understanding and researching and addressing and treating trauma, especially amongst the young, but also amongst the old, and including the ones who have already harmed others with their harm. Just because a monster has become a monster doesn't mean that monster doesn't need and deserve care. Don't fail to provide it. If not for their safety, then for your own. Hi, I'm Michael, and now you know my secret. I really am a monster, a hideously beautiful, monster. If you think you're nothing like me, just wait and see. If you think you are like me, I'm sorry. Terribly sorry. Because I know just how much it hurts. But because I know how much it hurts, congratulations. It's nice to know you're out there. It's nice to meet you. I love you more than you can probably ever know. Welcome to the inside. Feel what you feel and think what you think, because there's no one here, no one in here to judge but you. You've got the power to stay here in this deeply uncomfortable, painful, agonizing place. You've got the strength to suffer the world. You and me and others like us, we can learn to unmake this world and forge a better one. A world where maybe someday future children can grow up to say the important thoughts that change the courses of even more future lives. A world where the monsters live and play and love each other and their enemies. Where they don't just suffer in the light, but where they suffer beautifully in the dark. I'm done.